just like I said, they're all indicative of the regions they come from, and this is by no means different. Isis is a goddess of marriage, but also magic and healing, which, I think that says a lot when your marriage goddess is also a goddess of marriage, of healing and magic. Oh man, um, we've got some other guys. We've got Horus, War, the Sky, Falcons. Interesting to note because no other war gods have really had anything to do with the sky. They've all been on foot, usually portrayed as combative, usually portrayed as honorable. Horus is just a bird. He's a bird god. He does that. He does bird things. We're not going to spend any cash on this guy. He does bird things. But they also have, as well as Horus, their falcon god of war, they also have Sakbet, who is a lion goddess of fire and vengeance, which is usually paired with, war as well. Or I might be thinking of Bast. It's disappointing that I don't have that information on hand. But yeah, so most of their mythology and most of their myths and legends all revolve around the idea that bad things actually happen to the gods to protect the people, the common man, the mortals, as it were. And that's interesting by comparison to the Greek stuff, which there's really no reason that we remember Greek mythology over Egyptian mythology in most situations. We are basically living in a Grecian society as far as it goes. The Romans picked up Greek ideals and ran with them, and then the Romans just happened to hit it big and become important. So that's why we probably remember those guys more than remember anybody else. Also, their stories are a little cooler. Most of the Egyptian stuff, while yes, is very important for, talks a lot, I should say, about the gods and their sacrifice for mankind and all of that stuff. But it's really about duty and doing your job and what you have to do. And in this day and age, we just don't want to hear that. We want to hear things like Zeus went out and got laid like 8 times, and had all kinds of kids and turned into a tree and da 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 da. Whatever. They're still interesting and well-regarded stories, but relatively unknown. Not unlike, perfect segue, mind you, into not unlike our next one, Shinto. A lot of people are well aware of Shinto due to Japanese influences from the huge economic burst they had after World War II. Yes, two. After World War II. But a lot of people know about mythology from Japan, but they don't know the mythology from Japan, which is really disappointing because they've got some really interesting stories. You see, Japanese mythology doesn't really center around heroes being punished or gods doing the dirty work for people, or even, just figureheads that we get to worship on special occasions and brunch. No. The Egyptian stuff, or not the Egyptian, the Shinto beliefs are almost always people interacting with the spirits themselves. I hesitate to call them gods because there's a lot of argument over whether or not that is a mistranslation. But we'll get into that on another topic sometime. So they generally just interact with their gods and Tengu and all of the wonderful things that they've got that are... Oh yeah, I have spells. All of the wonderful things they've got that make up their mythology. So, which is extensive. Tengu, Kappa, just a crazy amount of stuff. Onis, basically demons. But, like I said, none of theirs really revolves around this sort of power struggle kind of idea between, the world at large and the people that that Western mythology does. It actually is very much more just nature's kind of our bro and a dick sometimes. Let's make sure let's help keep him in line. Um, they the idea is the same. They humanized the natural world and tried to figure out a way to come to terms with it. The Egyptians actually taking the idea a lot more literally than the rest of us did, and just straight up making anthropomorphic animals as their gods. Shit. But for the most part, this is what we see when we think mythology, when we think ancient mythology. Now, that's all well and good. Oh, sorry, hold on. I forgot about the relatively unknown stuff. See, this is another thing that people don't ever really pay attention to. Sorry, I gotta move this again. This is another thing people don't really pay attention to. The relatively unknown gods, because they're from Africa. That's pretty much the only reason. African gods are actually really cool. Africa does what Japan largely did, and humanizes nature to an alarming extent. And instead of deciding that nature is inherently bad and evil and wrong and hates you, or deciding that the gods have to protect you from nature because it's so awful, Africa has actually got stories that are just that. They're just stories about dudes doing stuff and metaphysical concepts. They have a very important god of stories, which pretty much everyone knows that has ever read Neil Gaiman work, because Neil Gaiman loves this guy. 2 of his books feature this character heavily. The titular Anansi Boys, which basically just follows his children in modern days, and American Gods, which is another movie that just follows him for the most part. It's not strictly about him, but he features heavily. Good reads, by the way. I hate Neil Gaiman's writing style, but whatever, that's just me. But for the most part, we're humanizing nature. We're giving it form. We're keeping an idea of what the hell we're looking at and how we're dealing with it. The only problem is, things didn't stay ancient forever, as you are aware by living in time frames where we have running water and electricity and generally just awesome stuff. Not dying to dysentery every 5 minutes. No, this is when we're going to skip ahead a little bit to what is commonly, but probably, it's a bit of a misnomer, it's commonly known as the Dark Ages. Now, I put that in finger quotes. I emphasize the fact that is pretty probably inaccurate. I have a history teacher at the college who will kill me if I ever actually call that the Dark Ages again. But that's what it's known colloquially as. God, that's a hard word to say sometimes. That's what it's known as. And that's what it's easiest to call it. This is when you see things that are associated with Gothic horror. Things like Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. We eschew gods for the most part because at this point Christianity has sort of taken over the Western world. I apologize for not having much on Chinese history or philosophy in this one. I know that anybody who actually pays attention to what I say will know that I'm very fond of those guys. But besides a quick mention to Buddhism and Confucianism and Taoism, the Trinity, so to speak, there's not really a whole lot to go over there. Sure, there's talking about the Chinese gods that were adapted to Buddhism and the like, but for the most part, we're not really going to deal with that because there's not a whole lot there to work with for me, especially because I haven't done as much research into that. I didn't grow up in that region, so I don't know these things. But moving into the Dark Ages, as it were, we get some of the things that we start to recognize, some things that we have still today, obviously, as most of the mythology we're talking about will still be things that people know about today. Dwarf assassin. King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, Galahad, Lancelot, Merlin, Morgana Le Fay, all of these big names that we know about, all these heavy hitters. The story, a little bit lesser known, but the story of Faust and him. It's if you haven't read this before, it's a German morality play that tries to tell people that making deals with Satan is wrong. I mean, whatever. We knew this. He's Satan. That happens. He's literally there to be evil. Or is he? We'll get into that. This is where we see things like werewolves and vampires. Things that have analogs across the world in every civilization. But see the strongest interest here in medieval England and the West in general, basically, during this time frame.